For decades, the story of Sophia Loren and Cary Grant existed as a shimmering piece of Hollywood folklore, a brief, brilliant collision of American royalty and European splendor on the sound stages of the 1950s. We saw the photographs, his impossibly handsome face, a picture of elegance next to her, a vision of volcanic, earth-shattering beauty. The studio press releases painted a picture of a fairy tale romance. But Sophia Loren, the woman at the center of it all, stayed silent. She let the world have its myth. But now at 91, after a lifetime of accolades, love, and loss, the silence has broken. The words she shares are not those of a young, starstruck actress, but of a woman who has lived. They are tinged with the complex colors of memory, the deep affection of a first love, the quiet regret of paths not taken, and the profound wisdom of a life examined. This is not the story the headlines told. This is her truth. Join us as we journey back to the golden age of cinema, beyond the carefully constructed images, to uncover the human story behind two of the greatest icons the world has ever known. Stay with us. What you're about to hear will change how you see them both, forever. You might look at the glamour of old Hollywood and wonder why the private details of a romance from 65 years ago still hold any weight. In an era of constant, instant disclosure, what can a story of silence and restraint possibly teach us? The answer is everything. Sophia Loren's long-awaited truth about Cary Grant is more than a celebrity revelation. It's a vital piece of cultural history. It's a case study in the creation of fame, in the machinery that built gods and goddesses out of mortal men and women, and in the personal cost of maintaining those divine facades. What does it mean when a woman who has spent her entire life under the public eye finally chooses to speak her truth, not for a paycheck or a promotion, but simply because the time is right? How does this act of quiet defiance challenge our understanding of the very concept of a movie star? For decades, we've consumed the myth of Cary Grant, the perfect, witty, debonair gentleman who never seemed to age or falter. And we've celebrated Sophia Loren, the exotic Italian bombshell who conquered Hollywood with her talent and her looks. But these were images, brands, carefully curated by studios and protected by the stars themselves. Loren's story peels back the glossy poster to reveal the complicated, vulnerable, and fascinatingly real people underneath. It forces us to ask, who are we really celebrating when we idolize these figures? And what parts of themselves did they have to sacrifice to become the icons we worship? The truth, as we are about to discover, is far more compelling and far more human than the myth. To understand the woman who would one day captivate Cary Grant and the world, you have to go back to the beginning, not to a movie set, but to the war-scarred streets of Pozzuoli, a gritty, working-class town on the outskirts of Naples. Sophia Villani Ciccolone, as she was then known, was not born into privilege. Her birth on September 20th, 1934, in a Rome clinic was a brief moment of modernity before she was returned to the ancient sun-baked reality of southern Italy. Her mother, Romilda Villani, had herself dreamed of movie stardom, even winning a Greta Garbo look-alike contest, but those dreams were dashed by her own family's disapproval. Instead, she poured those ambitions into her daughters. Sophia's early life was defined by two things: poverty and absence. Her father, Riccardo Ciccolone, a construction engineer with noble lineage but no sense of responsibility, refused to marry Romilda and was largely a phantom in Sophia's life. This early experience of abandonment would forge in her a fierce independence and a deep-seated need for security. During World War II, Pozzuoli was heavily bombed. Sophia, her sister Maria, and their mother were forced to flee to the countryside, living in a shared room with relatives. She later spoke of the terror of the air raids, of hiding in a dark, crowded railway tunnel, with the smell of fear and damp earth filling her lungs. These were not the formative years of a future star. They were the formative years of a survivor. You can almost see the seeds of her future resilience in the way she describes those days. She learned to find beauty in small things: a piece of chocolate, a new dress sewn from a grain sack, the shared laughter of her family. It was this same mother, Romilda, who entered the 14-year-old Sophia in a beauty contest. It wasn't about vanity, it was about survival. The prize money could buy food. In 1950, she was crowned one of the 12 princesses of the sea in a Neapolitan beauty contest. This small victory was her first step onto a stage. A year later, in 1951, she participated in the Miss Italia pageant. She didn't win. The crown went to another future star, Regina Lollobrigida, but she was noticed. Her presence was magnetic, a mix of shy awkwardness and simmering confidence. It was there she caught the eye of a man who would change her life: film producer and talent scout, Pietro Scalisi. More importantly, it was around this time she was introduced to another pivotal figure, a film producer named Carlo Ponti. He was older, sophisticated, and saw in the awkward teenager not just a pretty face, but raw, untapped talent and a ferocious will to succeed. He became her mentor, her guide, and eventually the great love of her life. Under his careful tutelage, Sophia Loren began her slow, deliberate transformation into the woman the world would come to know as Sophia Loren. The journey from Sophia Loren to Sophia Loren was not an overnight makeover. It was a methodical reinvention, a masterclass in self-creation. Carlo Ponti was the architect. He understood that for her to conquer international cinema, she needed more than just beauty. She needed discipline, language skills, and an unshakable sense of self. He arranged for diction and acting lessons, encouraging her to drop the Neapolitan dialect for a more refined Italian accent. He sent her scripts, pushing her to choose roles that offered depth over mere display. Her early Italian films like The White Sheik, 1952, and Aida, 1953, gave her invaluable experience, but she was often typecast as the sultry, silent other woman. The real turning point came in 1956 with Vittorio De Sica's The Gold of Naples, Il Soldato di Napoli. In the anthology film, Loren played a feisty, pizza-making wife in the segment Pizza a Credito. It was a role that allowed her to be funny, earthy, and profoundly human. Critics and audiences began to see past the stunning exterior to the formidable actress within. That same year, she signed a 5-film contract with Paramount Pictures, and her Hollywood adventure began. Her first English-language film, 1957's The Pride and Prejudice, released in the U.S. as The Pride and Passion, was a baptism by fire. She was opposite two giants of the screen, Cary Grant and Frank Sinatra. The language barrier was immense, and the Hollywood studio system was a world away from the more familial Italian film sets she was used to. There's a revealing scene from her memoir where she describes standing on a massive soundstage, feeling utterly alone. The crew spoke a language she barely understood. The procedures were rigid and impersonal, and she felt like an exotic import rather than a collaborator. But instead of retreating, she observed. She watched Grant, how he commanded the space with an effortless grace, how he treated the crew with respect, how he could switch from charming to serious in an instant. She was learning not just her lines, but the art of being a star, but she refused to be molded into something she wasn't. Studio executives suggested she anglicize her name, perhaps to Lindsay or Lauren. She refused. "I am Sophia Loren," she insisted. They wanted her to pluck her eyebrows, lighten her hair. She resisted. This was the core of her power. She understood that her unique identity was her greatest asset. In this quiet defiance culminated in her 1961 masterpiece, Two Women, a Lascio Chiara. It was a role she fought for, a harrowing story of a mother trying to protect her daughter during the war. Her performance was devastating in its raw power and emotional honesty. When she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, she made history. She was the first actor to win an Oscar for a performance in a foreign language. In that moment, Sophia Loren, the international star, was fully born. She had not just conquered Hollywood, she had done it on her own terms, as an Italian, as Sophia, proving that authenticity could be more powerful than any studio's marketing plan. The fates of Sophia Loren and Cary Grant were first intertwined by the calculated hands of Paramount Pictures executives in 1957. The studio had high hopes for their epic war drama, The Pride and Prejudice. They needed a European star of the moment to add prestige and box office appeal abroad, and they needed an established American icon to guarantee success at home. Sophia Loren, fresh off her success in The Gold of Naples, was the perfect choice. Cary Grant, at 53, was one of the few actors with the stature and name recognition to anchor such a massive production. The pairing on paper was pure gold. Their first meeting was arranged, a carefully orchestrated photo opportunity at the Cinecittà Studios in Rome. In the black and white photographs from that day, you can see the dynamic immediately. Grant, the epitome of old-world Hollywood charm in a perfectly tailored suit, looks at Loren with a mixture of professional courtesy and undisguised interest. Loren, just 22, is radiant, but also holds herself with a certain cautious reserve. She was in his world now, and she knew it. In later interviews, she described him as immediately charismatic, with a light in his eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. But she also sensed the wall he had built around himself, the carefully constructed persona of Cary Grant, that served as both his greatest asset and his most impenetrable fortress. The power dynamic was stark. He was the legend, the top-billed star who could greenlight projects with a nod. She was the promising newcomer, the European discovery. He had decades of experience navigating the treacherous waters of Hollywood. She was still learning to swim. And yet, something unexpected began to simmer on the set of The Pride and Prejudice. The on-screen chemistry the producers had hoped for was real, but it was bleeding into their off-camera lives. Grant found himself captivated by Loren in a way that surprised him. He was used to being the charmer, the one in control. But with Sophia, he was often the one being charmed, disarmed by her combination of youthful innocence and worldly wisdom. The geography of their budding relationship played a crucial role. Filming on location in the Spanish countryside, away from the prying eyes of Hollywood and the Italian press, allowed for a more genuine connection. He would seek her out between takes, not to discuss the script, but to ask about her life in Italy, about her family. He was genuinely curious about the woman behind the beautiful face. In Rome, he would take her to elegant restaurants, introducing her to a world of luxury she had only ever dreamed of. He was a mentor, a suitor, and a protector all at once. But back in Hollywood, the dynamics shifted. The press was relentless, manufacturing a romance that was both real and exaggerated. Studio executives whispered in their ears, framing their relationship as a marketing strategy. What had begun as a genuine connection was now a public commodity, and the pressure was beginning to build. He was a legend to millions, and to Sophia, he was becoming something much more complicated. The headline moment, the one that has been repeated in biographies and film retrospectives for decades, is Cary Grant's marriage proposal to Sophia Loren. It's the romantic climax of their story. The fairy tale gesture that seems to confirm everything the publicity machine had been selling. But the reality, as Loren has finally revealed, was far more nuanced and emotionally complex. The proposal didn't happen on a moonlit balcony in Rome or on a glamorous film set. It happened in the quiet, controlled environment of Cary Grant's Beverly Hills home. By this point, filming on The Pride and Prejudice was over, but their relationship had continued. Grant was completely smitten. He was writing her letters, long, thoughtful, and deeply personal letters that revealed a side of him few had ever seen. He would call her in Rome, the crackle of the transatlantic line, a constant reminder of the distance between them. He arranged for her to return to Hollywood for their next film together, 1958's Houseboat, a romantic comedy that seemed designed to capitalize on their off-screen chemistry. The day of the proposal, according to Loren's recollections, was deceptively simple. Grant cooked for her, a rare and intimate gesture for a man of his stature. He was, by all accounts, a thoughtful and attentive host. As the evening progressed, the conversation turned serious. He spoke of his loneliness, of his failed marriages, and of his desire to build a real life with someone he could trust. And then he got down on one knee. He didn't have a ring, at least not at that moment, but the question was clear and heartfelt. He wanted to marry her. Now, if you're wondering why a 22-year-old woman on the cusp of international stardom wouldn't immediately accept a proposal from Cary Grant, you have to understand the position she was in. What no one saw coming was her response. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She asked for time. In that single quiet request, you see the incredible strength and foresight of Sophia Loren. She was not just swept away by the romance of it all. She was thinking. She was weighing the immense professional opportunity against the personal cost. She was considering the fact that Grant, though separated, was still legally married to his third wife, Betsy Drake. She was thinking about Carlo Ponti, the man who had guided her career and with whom she was already deeply in love. And perhaps most importantly, she was thinking about herself. She sensed that marrying Cary Grant would mean becoming Mrs. Cary Grant, an accessory to his legend, rather than Sophia Loren in her own right. That pause, now with that moment of reflection, was the first time she truly chose herself. And that's when everything changed. The aftermath of that proposal was not a simple case of unrequited love. It was a tangled web of affection, ambition, and industry pressure that revealed the darker side of Hollywood's golden age. Grant, genuinely in love, and perhaps a little unused to being refused, intensified his pursuit. But his love, Loren now reveals, came with conditions. He wanted to shape her, to mold her into the perfect partner for a Hollywood icon. In her memoir, she recounts conversations where he would gently suggest she change her name. Sophia is beautiful, he'd say, but something like Loren, it would be so much easier for Americans. He'd critique her choice of roles, steering her toward more sophisticated comedies and away from the gritty, high dramatic parts she was drawn to. He even made subtle comments about her style, her family, her very Italianness. These weren't malicious commands. They were the actions of a man from a different generation, a man who believed he knew best, who wanted to protect the woman he loved by making her fit into his world. But for Sophia, it felt like an erasure. The very things he wanted to smooth out were the essence of who she was, and that's when everything changed. Enter Carlo Ponti. He had been watching the Grant-Loren saga unfold from a distance with growing concern. When news of the proposal reached him, he didn't hesitate. He boarded a plane for Los Angeles, not as a jilted lover, but as a strategic manager protecting his most valuable asset, both professionally and personally. What followed was a tense, unspoken competition for Sophia's future. Grant had the glamour and the Hollywood pedigree. Ponti had her trust, her history, and a shared cultural background. He understood her in a way Grant never could. The studio, for its part, was thrilled with the drama. Paramount executives saw a goldmine. A Grant-Loren wedding would be the publicity coup of the decade. They quietly encouraged Grant, leaking stories to the gossip columns, while simultaneously worrying about the potential scandal of his divorce. Off camera, the story was different from the fan magazine fantasies. Sophia was caught in a vice. On one side, a charming, powerful man offering her the world, but a world where she would have to shrink herself to fit. On the other, a man who offered her partnership, who wanted to build an empire with her, not absorb her into his own. Whilst the emotional toll was immense, in later, more candid moments, Loren has described feeling pulled apart during this period. She was genuinely fond of Grant, even loved him in a way, but she also felt the weight of his expectations. She was a young woman trying to find her voice in a loud, demanding world, and the two most powerful men in her life were both trying to speak for her. The truth is quieter than the headline suggested. It wasn't a passionate love triangle. It was a battle for a young woman's identity, fought in the plush offices of Hollywood studios and the quiet corners of Roman restaurants. Sophia Loren's decision to choose Carlo Ponti over Cary Grant was not a dramatic, cinematic breakup. It was a quiet, firm turning of a page. After completing Houseboat in 1958, she returned to Europe. And the physical distance created an emotional space that allowed both of them to move on. There was no final, explosive confrontation. Instead, there was a gradual fading, a gentle but undeniable separation. The most poignant moment of this transition came in the form of a phone call. In her memoir, Loren describes a conversation with Grant after she and Ponti had married in a quiet ceremony in Mexico in 1957, a marriage that would face legal hurdles for years, but was in their hearts real. She was nervous about making the call. How do you tell a man like Cary Grant that you've chosen another? When she finally told him, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was warm, but the familiar playful sparkle was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. He wished her happiness, he said, but the formality of his tone marked the end of their intimacy. It was the sound of a door closing softly but firmly. The years that followed saw their lives diverge onto separate, though equally stellar, trajectories. Sophia and Carlo Ponti became one of the most enduring power couples in international cinema. Ponti produced many of her most iconic films, including Marriage Italian Style, 1964, which earned her a second Oscar nomination. They built a life together, raising two sons, Carlo Jr. and Eduardo, and splitting their time between Rome, Geneva, and their estate in Marino. Sophia became a mother, a role she cherished above all others, and a global icon who never lost touch with her roots. Cary Grant, for his part, continued his legendary career. He made more classic films, including North by Northwest, 1959, and Charade, 1963, cementing his status as the epitome of cinematic style. In 1965, at the age of 61, he married actress Diane Cannon, 33 years his junior. The marriage was tumultuous but produced the great joy of his life, his daughter, Jennifer, born in 1966. He retired from filmmaking in 1966 to focus on being a father, a decision that stunned Hollywood but revealed a side of him that prioritized family over fame. They rarely, if ever, saw each other again. Their worlds had moved on. The silence between them stretched for decades, a vast, unspoken history. In occasional interviews, when asked about the other, their responses were always kind but guarded, full of respect but devoid of personal detail. And they were two stars who had once burned brightly together, now orbiting in separate galaxies. The distance wasn't just geographical, it was emotional, a quiet testament to the choices they made and the lives they built apart. For over 50 years, Sophia Loren maintained her silence on the details of her relationship with Cary Grant. It was a chapter of her life she kept private, tucked away from the public's insatiable curiosity. In her 2018 memoir, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, she addressed the period with grace and affection, but she held back the most intimate details, treating their connection with a respectful distance. So what prompted her, at the age of 91, to finally open up? The catalyst was not a lucrative book deal or a sensational television interview. It was a quiet moment during the filming of a 2023 documentary, He Was Sophia, A Lifetime of Art, directed by her son, Eduardo Ponti. The setting was intimate, just Sophia, her son behind the camera, and the sun-drenched warmth of her home in Geneva. Eduardo, who has always had a uniquely close relationship with his mother, asked a simple, gentle question. Mama, of all the people you've known, who taught you the most about love? The question seemed to hang in the air. Loren, her face a beautiful map of a life fully lived, looked away for a moment, as if searching through decades of memories. When she turned back to the camera, her eyes were glistening. Cary, she said softly, he taught me about a certain kind of love, a grand cinematic love. But he also taught me what I didn't want. And then she began to speak, not with the carefully crafted words of a seasoned interviewee, but with the simple, direct honesty of a woman reflecting on her past. I loved him, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. How could you not? He was Cary Grant. He made you feel like you were the only woman on earth. But his love was like a beautiful, gilded cage. It was magnificent, but it had bars. He wanted to take care of me, to protect me. But I was just a girl from Pozzuoli. I needed to learn to protect myself. She went on to explain that his proposal, while romantic, came with an unspoken expectation that she would subsume her own identity into his. He wanted an Italian star for his arm, she said, but Carlo wanted an Italian partner to build a life with. The difference was everything. What made this confession so powerful was its timing and its context. At 91, Sophia Loren had nothing left to prove. Her legacy was secure, her life full. She could speak of Cary Grant not as a scandal or a career stepping stone, but as a formative, complicated, and ultimately necessary chapter in her life. There was no bitterness, no regret, only the clear, compassionate wisdom of age. The truth, as she finally told it, wasn't a shocking revelation. It was a deeply human story about choice, identity, and the courage it takes to become yourself. Sophia Loren's long-awaited truth does more than just add a footnote to Hollywood history. It fundamentally reshapes the legacies of two of its most enduring icons. For Cary Grant, it offers a rare glimpse behind the impeccably polished facade. The public knew Cary Grant, the suave, quick-witted charmer who seemed to float through life with effortless grace. But Loren's story reveals the man behind the myth. Archibald Leach, the sensitive, a lonely boy from Bristol who created a persona as a shield. His pursuit of Loren, with its mix of genuine affection and controlling instincts, shows a man who craved connection, but perhaps didn't know how to achieve it without trying to manage it. It humanizes him, transforming him from a two-dimensional legend into a complex man capable of profound love and ultimately heartbreak. His story becomes less about perfection and more about the universal search for belonging. For Sophia Loren, this revelation is the final, triumphant act in a lifetime of self-creation. It reinforces what her admirers have always sensed, that her greatest strength was not her beauty or her talent, but her unshakable sense of self. Her decision to turn down Cary Grant, one of the most powerful men in the world, was a defining moment. It was the assertion of a young woman who understood that her identity was not negotiable. In an era when actresses were often treated as commodities, Loren acted as her own CEO, making the strategic decision that her long-term autonomy was worth more than any short-term gain. This story cements her legacy not just as a great actress, but as a pioneer of female agency in Hollywood. But the impact of this story extends beyond the two individuals involved. It serves as a powerful corrective to the way we talk about the golden age of Hollywood. We often romanticize this era, glossing over the immense pressures and systemic inequalities that shape the lives of its stars. The Loren Grant story is a perfect illustration of the studio system at work, manufacturing romances, controlling narratives, and treating personal lives as extensions of the marketing budget. It highlights the particular challenges faced by foreign actresses who were expected to be exotic and compliant, and the power imbalances that existed between established male stars and emerging female talent. Perhaps most importantly, Loren's honesty at 91 offers a lesson in storytelling itself. In a world that demands instant confession and constant content, she chose to wait. She waited until the story could be told not with the heat of the moment, but with the cool, clear light of perspective. There is no score settling, no desire for revenge. There is only truth, spoken with compassion and grace. In doing so, she has given us a gift. A story that is not just about two movie stars, but about the timeless, universal journey of finding oneself and choosing one's own path. Today, Sophia Loren, at 91, is a living testament to a life lived with courage and authenticity. Her face, framed by the soft lines of 1,000 smiles and a few well-earned tears, is as captivating as ever. When she speaks of Cary Grant now, there is no shadow of pain, only the warm, gentle glow of memory. The truth she has finally shared is not a scandalous expose, but a quiet, profound meditation on love, choice, and the unyielding power of one's own identity. In a world that often flattens its icons into one-dimensional myths, her story reminds us of the rich, complicated, and beautifully messy reality that lies beneath. The legend of Cary Grant and Sophia Loren will always be a dazzling part of cinema history. But the truth, the story of a man who loved deeply but couldn't let go, and a young woman who loved in return but loved herself more, is even better. It's the story of a woman who, from the war-torn streets of Pozzuoli to the heights of global stardom, never lost sight of who she was. As we close this chapter, we are left with a deeper, more meaningful understanding of two legends. Not just the perfect star and the exotic beauty, but Archie and Sophia, two people who connected for a brief, brilliant moment in time, made their choices, and lived with the consequences. The truth, as Sophia Loren has finally shared it, is more interesting, more inspiring, and more human than any myth Hollywood could ever invent. It is, in the end, the greatest performance of her life, simply and beautifully being herself. What part of her journey resonated most with you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and join us again as we continue to explore the real stories behind the silver screen's greatest legends.